Hi folks, this is John Watson, International Master John Watson. This is Ask the Master on ICC TV. The main idea of this show is to provide players with a forum to ask questions about chess and the chess world. You can send these questions in advance, or if you're tuning in live to the YouTube ICC show, you can participate in the chat on the right of your screen and ask me questions right now. I'll generally give priority to questions that I've received beforehand, which has the advantage that they can be more particular and more concrete questions with maybe analysis in them. Someone this week gave me a game, and give me a second. I'm going to adjust my sound here. There we go. So let me see. But otherwise, there are three ways to submit questions in advance. One of them is to ask an email address, askimwatson@chessclub.com. That's ASKIMWATSON at chessclub.com. And I'll get that right away. And probably the other really good way to do it, to send, is to my ICC. Assuming you have an ICC account, you can just send me a message at John L. Watson. That's my ICC handle, JOHN, L as in lion, WATSON. Okay, you can ask about anything related to chess, books. Opening theory is very, very popular. History, current tournaments, current events, chess strategy, all kinds of things have been asked in the past. This week I got a bunch of theory questions. Okay, so without further ado, I think we're running a little late here. Let me catch up on some questions from the past few weeks before people give up on me answering them, and then we'll also mix in questions that I just got. So it'll be a nice combination. Now the first thing I've got is a game from Harry Bell. He actually sent a game, which is unusual. We don't usually show games, but I think it's a great idea if people could send them. I haven't received whole games. I usually just receive questions. So even though I probably won't go over them very, very thoroughly, I will be able to go over them to some extent, and it's like getting a lesson about your game. So he says, here's a game I'm fairly proud of in which I beat Jeremy Silman at a regular slow time control in Grants Pass, Oregon, back in 1984. So this is ways back. I also subsequently played a similar variation against John Donaldson, obtaining a draw. I believe you wrote a book published by Batsford on the accelerated dragon. So I guess I have a couple of questions for you. One, where did black first go wrong? And two, does this change any of the conclusions in your book? So let me put this game up, and we'll see that, the Silman game. And the first thing is that I didn't actually ever write a book or anything else about the accelerated dragon, but you know who did was Jeremy Silman himself, your opponent, and also John Donaldson, who you said you played. They wrote a book together and wrote separately also about the accelerated fianchetto. So it's kind of funny that you asked me about it, but I've certainly seen a lot of analysis over the years on it, and I've taught it. So let's just see what we get here. Okay, so the game starts out. That's the Sicilian Defense. And this is called, now if you played the dragon, a lot of you know goes this way. Whoops, sorry. Goes this way. And black fianchettos. But sometimes in order to avoid certain lines, black will try to fianchetto earlier than that. And the way he gets to that position is by playing here first, although we looked at just g6 earlier, actually in an earlier show, which has its own disadvantages. And now g6, which is called an accelerated fianchetto because you haven't waited for d6, or even knight f6. Okay, so in this game, white plays, just develops normally, and black attacks that knight on d4, and white defends it. And now, for example, if black played d6 and white played f3 or something, and black played knight f6, we'd have a dragon kind of position. So black is still not touching his d-pawn. White plays there as in the Yugoslav dragon. There are choices, of course. And black plays this move, which is a fun move because it's a little different. The usual move is castles. Queen a5 was played a lot in the old days. Jeremy played it a lot, actually, for quite a while. And then I think later on maybe he switched to castling. I don't remember. But both moves are playable. This one has an immediate threat, and there are also a lot of tactics involved with Queen a5, which is why black was playing it. Now, let me just show you. So white castles, black castles, and white plays this move h3. Now, often white will play bishop b3 here, is the other idea. and wait with a move like h3. But the point of h3, it often transposes, is to stop the move knight g4. After black plays d6, which is his next move, then without the pawn in h3, the move knight g4 would be a very strong move. And so white has stopped that. And now he gets his bishop out of the way. That bishop can be hanging in a lot of variations after moves like queen there, which also attacks this way. So white gets his bishop out of the way, and this is a standard position. So now white plays a committal move, but once he's played h3, it's the most logical way to attack, which is, I'm sorry, black plays there first, developing that is the main move. And white plays this. It's a little hard to play slowly because black's just getting all of his pieces out, and maybe pretty soon we'll break in the center. Put the rooks here and think about e5s and d5s. So this is a good aggressive way to play f4. And now black plays a somewhat odd move. I don't think it's the best move. It's not terrible, but I don't think it's the best move. Out of maybe 1,000 games in this position, queen h5 was only played in 25 games in my database. On the other hand, it was played by Gadakomsky and a couple of other strong players, so it can't be that bad. I still think that better moves are, just for the sake of answering the question, I think that's a better move. And I think the best of all is the one that's played most often. The minute f4 is played, it's often good to play this in the Sicilian here, aiming at that slightly weak square. The other thing this does is the queen here becomes useful because you can support the move e5. And I think that's a good way to play. A standard answer to that is here, protecting this. And there was a game, just to show you that good players play both sides of this, Anand played this move against Philidor Legrave. This was just last year in the Norway tournament, the same one that's just coming up, the Stavanger tournament in Norway. And Philidor Legrave found this move, and all of a sudden it was embarrassing to try to defend that square, oddly enough. And immediately got an equal game, because there's threats like that too in many positions, hitting it this way too. So he got an equal game. In fact, he even won the b pawn, but white had just enough compensation. But white was struggling more than black. So it turns out queen e1's a mistake. This move has been played more often. I'm sorry, the queen d3 now is played. And then black has a bunch of moves, but it seems very simple to just play like this. And then I like this maneuver. The reason I'm showing you this is because you should know about this maneuver as black. The idea is to win the dark squares. So it's okay to lose your defense of your king side to some extent if you're winning dark squares. And in fact, this was appeared in a couple of games, this kind of position. And then this was just equal. Very nice square for the knight. So that's one way to play. White's still perfectly in the game, and so is black. So it's just some way of playing the game, but I just want to show you that. So did I go back? Yeah. So we went back to the game where he played this move, queen h5. And now white can just play this. He's had success with this move, just keeping the queens on and stopping that knight takes d4 move, stopping for simplification. And also the move he plays in the game, which is queen d3. And then I was curious about this move, which actually seems to lead to a small advantage. People don't usually play it, but after that, now he's got to watch out for combinations of tactics here and also this knight down move. But it turns out just this simple move, protecting everything, I think gives white a small advantage. Maybe not enough to mean much, but it makes you wonder about queen h5 as a move generally. There's also this move. And then soon you play this move, usually. So just for the record, I think that's a little better for white. The computer seems to like it for white. It makes sense. You have a little bit of space, and black's pieces aren't coordinating beautifully, but that's very small. So in the game, white plays instead this move, just protecting the e4 square. And black plays there, and I think that's just a mistake, because I think white could simply take that. And I think what black was thinking was that he could play here, double attacking here, and also attacking c2 and d3. The problem is after queen d1, the queens are being threatened to come off, and I don't think black has any compensation for a pawn here. Well, both sides missed that, and white didn't take it. White played safely with this move a3. So in a way, we've gone beyond theory here. I guess the first thing I'd say is queen h5 is not ideal, and this is a mistake, even though white didn't take advantage of it. But since he didn't take advantage of it, it's still black's pretty much in the game, no big deal. And white played, now black defends that pawn, and white comes over thinking about moves like e5, centralizing rooks, very logical. black puts a rook on an open file, and white plays there. Now the computer likes this clever little move, not the kind of move you would normally see. It has g4 ideas sometimes, and this pawn is protected. It says white has a nice but still small advantage. Instead, white played more naturally, played this way, and black takes that, and white took here first, so you get a tempo with e takes d5, and that opens up the file, but on the other hand makes this a worse piece. So black played back, white covered that square by simply playing here, and d4, thinking about bishop d4. Black played there, covering his e-pawn, which is a little vulnerable, and white played there, attacking the queen and asking it where it should go. And the question was, where did black really make a mistake? And this is getting to be a pretty serious mistake. Not overwhelming, but not good. It's better to play queen h4 as it turns, because the queen ends up being exposed on that square. And you'll see how that works in a second. Black's got to watch out, because bishop g4 is threatened here, and winning a piece. And it's not so easy to get away from that. The queen is almost trapped. So the queen goes here. So far so good. And now white could have played quite well with the move bishop here, because that stops the queen from retreating this way. And then the queen starts getting kind of stuck, and there are g4 moves and there are discovered attacks, and it's just not what black wants. But instead white played here, and black was able to sneak over to the side, so he didn't stand that badly. And white played this nice aggressive move. This makes it aesthetically very pleasing, because the bishop is coming out to attack and the rook is opening up, because white's going to open up that file. And it also extends the range of this bishop once that's taken right into the king side. So that's really kind of nice. And black plays there. It's a good defensive move. White takes, black takes. Probably h takes is maybe a little better, but really, so this is not that bad for black. He's made good logical moves. White plays there, and there you go. That's the losing move. That's the move that really hurts. Black's not really in that much trouble if he just plays a simple move like this. There's no real way to crack down black's king side. And in the meantime, he can play for things like probably this, and it's a reasonable position. It's probably white's better, but not by a great deal. And instead, black played here, and that's actually just a losing move. White plays excellent move. The queen is short squares, is what it amounts to. Black thought he could get away with this, threatening queen h2 check. And after that move, he did get away with queen h2 check. It still stood a little better, white did, but had a pretty much forced win with this move. Now the queen's trapped, has to be taken, and now this move is coming next. And then the queen can't go back because of check. The other move would be good too, but rook there is threatened, and there's really nothing to do about it. If you look at this for all, you'll see it's just a bad position. It's just there's no way to stop that from working. Playing there is the best move, but then you only have two pawns for a piece, and a really pretty bad game too. That's what would have happened. So that was white's chance to win pretty much on the spot. And instead, he played a good move, forcing black to check and then bringing the king up. And now the queen's still in a kind of awkward square. But really, the big advantage is gone here. So black played there. And that was so funny. Now, that's the second huge mistake. And this one, white does take advantage of. There's no reason to panic here. This is just a normal position. You could just play here, for example, to block off the f-file. And black has moves like this as possibilities, defensively speaking. It's quite playable, this position. But for some reason, black's been defending for a while, I guess, is worried about the king and sacrifices an exchange. And in a way, it doesn't make any sense at all, because it just helps white attack and get rid of some pieces, simplify at the same time. So I'm not going to show you too much more. And in fact, here, if you look for a second, you'll see that this is basically just a winning position. There wasn't much drama. This happened next. And now he's in exchange up for nothing, basically. And I guess I don't have to go much further than this. I'll just show you a few moves. White gets back for the defense, and there it is. And maybe that's a good place to stop. You can see there's no attack here. And white's just in exchange up. And, it took some technique, and there's still quite a few moves ahead, but that was basically what happened. So that's that's a game. Thank you so much for sending that. And the question about the opening is simply that queen h5 is a little dubious, but he survived that okay. And then after that, both sides missed some opportunities, basically. But black's big mistake was to play this move. Well, queen f5 was not very good. Queen h4 was a blunder. And then for some reason giving up the rook on f8. I don't know why black did that. Okay, thank you very much for sending that question in. I think it's a good question. Here's one, a theoretical one from, let me just show you this. I was looking at the Sicilian material in your book, Dangerous Weapons Sicilian, Dazzle Your Opponents. That's a everyman book. I think it's by John Ems and Palliser, Richard Palliser, maybe a few other people. He says, is the Sicilian O'Kelly variation still viable? I do not see this being played by any high-level grandmasters in recent years. So I remember discussing this when the book came out, this variation, with John Ems himself when he was writing this section of the Dangerous Weapons book. And first of all, I should show you what that is. I don't think I have a file on that, so I'll go all the way back here. Let me just show you what the O'Kelly variation is. This is kind of a fun line because a lot of times white doesn't know this move. So it kind of resembles the Najdorf in a funny way. And the first main point of this move, I would say that the main reason people started playing it was because if white plays normally to get an open Sicilian, black can play on the Najdorf-like idea, e5, but white can't go here, which is what he usually can do in the Sicilian, in order to get pressure on that square. And since he can't go there, black can take over the initiative with knight f6 and stands perfectly well. And the move knight f5, which looks attractive at first, has this problem, with the bishop coming out attacking the knight. So that's the idea. Unfortunately, white usually knows about that idea and doesn't play d4. d4 is almost a mistake. It's certainly not the ideal move. So let's just look at, I looked at a large correspondence database. I haven't looked at this stuff in a long time, and there's quite a few games from the past 2 years. So that indicates that the variation is probably playable for black. Otherwise, he just wouldn't be playing it that often, even if white does get a small advantage. So here's a few ideas. Now, first of all, white could just kind of wait and play there, and then if black plays one of these kinds of moves, he can transpose into the a normal open Sicilian. And so therefore, the most unique move is this. And I think it's actually a pretty good move, because b4 can come with tempo. Now, you can still play moves like e6 and d6, but this is an interesting counterattacking move, considered probably okay for black. So what are some other moves? A c4 is very logical. Now your idea is to play d4, takes, and you've got a Maroczy bind position. So d4 is sort of a threat. And you can play e6, which is what Morzevich played, and just play that kind of position, this sort of position here, which is a kind of a Paulsen Sicilian kind of position. Maybe this move. In fact, this is a well-known variation with queen c7 as the main move, although they used to play bishop b4. I'm not so sure if anything's wrong with either move. So that's e6 is certainly a possibility. White can wait and play here and try and make black commit to something. That's probably the best way to play it. And also after c4, we have simply knight c6. And the idea is that after captures, black's going to play e5 again. And that's a known line. That's a pretty decent line. So that's c4. And what I used to play when I was white and I was an e4 player, I used to play c3 here. And I've looked at it a fair amount. Now, Ems talks about two moves here. John Ems does. He talks about, well, d5 is the move he thinks has to be played pretty much. And then you can play a gambit move, knight f6, which even he doesn't, I think, completely trust, but at least it's kind of fun if you don't like queen d5. Queen d5 is the main move. And I was looking at correspondence games with this line, and white is doing pretty well in the following line. Now, just playing very modestly with that move. The idea is that black has an absolutely standard c3 Sicilian, but he's got that move a6 in, which is maybe not so desirable. It's a little bit slow. Not that he can possibly stand that badly, but if you look at this for a second, here's the main line. Here, here. Black doesn't want to take this and give white the c3 square, but eventually he's going to have to, is the idea. Like right now. Now this is becoming kind of a threat, and so is c4 becoming an idea. So at this point, black does take, and white takes with knight c3 coming, is the idea. And even knight d4 is considered to give white just a very small advantage. I don't know if I really believe that, but the idea is to put the bishop here. Maybe white gets a tiny, tiny something. But I like the CD. I think that's a good line. Just for example, oh, and what black has done to avoid this, oh yeah, I'm sorry. This move has actually been played in several correspondence games just because it's a safer advantage. And then this happens. This is a fairly forced line. Takes here, and then it turns out white's doing rather well in spite of black's freedom of movement just because white is so much better developed. And usually there's going to be some strong knight d5 move. Even after that, it turns out, white's going to get knight d5 in because he's going to have this pin along the diagonal. For example, knight d5 right now. Turns out there's no really good way to take there because of this bishop f3 if black starts taking things. That sounds a little odd, but seems to be true. So that seems very odd to me. Maybe there's a rook d1 first. Yeah, excuse me. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so let's try rook d1, castles, and now knight d5, for example. And so that's a quick overview of that line. And I think I would play c3 if I ran into the O'Kelly. And I do think white gets a small advantage, but as I say, correspondence players are willing to play it for black. That's a very good sign. These are the top correspondence players. So that's a very good sign that your disadvantage is not too big. Okay, then we get another question. How's our chat doing here? Any way to sharpen positions versus the Philidor defense? Aha, I'm going to talk about the Philidor defense. If you have time, we want predictions for the U.S. Championship. I have those. I've thought about that. There's a blue aura around. Yes, that is an issue, and we're having trouble with that. We're going to try to solve that problem, but it may not happen until next week. It has to do with the lighting in this room, I think. Let's see if I can just move and fix that a little bit. It's very sensitive. The camera is very sensitive is what it amounts to. Okay, so let's look at another question that I got. There are a lot of questions this week. Mostly sort of theory ones, but also some general ones like that U.S. Championship question. Let me, okay, here's a question that a listener asks about the Michael Marin series on the English opening. He gets a game, which leads to a position from that opening where Marin suggests that white is doing well. It's the reverse dragon, which is doing very well for black in general. Seems to be a very solid, good way. A lot of the top players will play this. Black gets some space. Sure, he's playing the white side of a dragon, but it's one of the he's playing the dragon as white with an extra tempo, but that doesn't necessarily mean very much because it's sort of a defensive position to begin with. Black isn't taking any chances. So in this game, white expands on the queen side, very common idea. And black plays this. This is not that common. Black's idea is to play bishop f8 and maybe knight d4, maybe even this and bishop f6. But the rook on e8 is going to give the bishop a place to go to, but also support the move e4. And also if knight d4 is played, and there's a capture here on d4, and the pawn recaptures, that'll open up the e file. So it's a nice little slow move. White plays rook b1. That's to get off this diagonal, but also to help support the move b5. These are fairly sophisticated moves. Black simply moves back. He's still thinking about knight d4 if the move b5 is played. So white develops standard sort of dragon position, right? For white. White's got all the dragon moves in. But then these queenside moves are desirable in the dragon, but they aren't not usually played. So we're in a slightly unique kind of position that dragon players won't particularly necessarily recognize. Okay, so black just goes ahead with that knight d4 idea. He doesn't wait for the move b5 to hit him. And white retreats. Otherwise, it's just too easy. I think I explained if you take there, then you're getting, with loss of tempo, you're opening up this file, and then bishop g4 will come. So the idea of knight e1 is don't cooperate. You're going to play e3, chasing the knight away, and maybe bring the knight back up. At least that's one idea. So black sort of covers that long diagonal, blocks that long diagonal. Obviously, that's white's best piece. And white indeed chases the knight away. And black plays a nice, clever little move, because if white takes that now, it opens the C file, and it means there's moves like that. That's a nice little outpost. Might also be an A5 move. This is okay for white, but it's not particularly inspiring. So white plays here. Black captures, and this is where we get to the position where the questioner is asking about what to do. It turns out that Black played this move, and we'll get back to that, but he wants to play this move, or he asks, what about that move? Which after all pins this pawn and maybe gets ready to just play like this and try to win that pawn. And he says, what's the knight doing on e1? And that's a good point. The knight can't move without losing that pawn. And in the meantime, what's white doing? So I looked at this for a while, and I think it's a good question. I think Black's doing just fine here. The most interesting line the computer came up with, the one that seemed the best to me after looking at a bunch of stuff, is to play there. And then I kind of like Black going this way. He can also go to g6. It's not the end of the world. And then the whole idea is to play here and try and break up Black's center a little bit. And then after taking, you take this way. So you have 2 center pawns to none and some fairly active pieces. But still, that center is not inspiring at all. And if Black just plays here, these pawns are still in a rather oddball situation. And I looked at this for a while. The computer agrees that this is nothing special. Probably dead equal, actually. Nothing special for white. It's too hard to kind of organize. If you play d4, you're giving up that key square. Black has hardly any weaknesses. And these squares here are a little bit loose. So white's got some advantages, but so does Black. So that's sort of the answer to the question, is bishop f5 any good? And I think it is. And as I say, he also could have played bishop g6 in that position. So I think it's a very good point. The other interesting thing here that I thought was interesting is the way the game went was here. And white played here, and Black played this move and actually got an advantage because he's breaking down the queen side and getting open lines there with a nice centralized knight. So Marin says that a major improvement is to play this way, which he gives an exclamation point. And I was looking at this, and he says followed by queen c2, knight here, and rook over, followed by maybe attacking on the queen side. He says first you play all those 3 moves. And it seems very passive for Black. And white doesn't even have the 2 bishops, so I was very skeptical of this. And I think I don't see anything wrong. There's one move right there, simple move, just centralize. And I have a quick example, which is here. I just want to double on the file. Knight here, protect the center. And white can't do anything spectacular here, it turns out. Can't make any pawn breaks. So now just here, maybe the idea of c5, for example, followed by c4, knight b6 and c4. And he can also just centralize. This position's this position here is quite attractive with pressure coming down this way. And the computer likes Black, actually thinks Black is superior here. Whether he is or not, I'm sure he isn't worse. So, and this, I guess I'd say in general, Michael Marin's been one of the best authors and writers in chess for many, many years, and I really recommend his books. He doesn't write that much about, he doesn't like large opening books. This book, he was trying to prove that white was better in every line. And generally in the English opening, white isn't better. White has ways of getting play. And so the book is, I think, the worst thing he's ever done. Of course, it won a Book of the Year award. I don't know. It doesn't have many explanations, and most of the lines are too optimistic for white, in my opinion. So somehow it won the Book of the Year award, even though, of all the great books he's written, it's the last one that should have, in my opinion. And I found so many things that just aren't right about the assessments in the book. And this is an example. This is typical. He's just too optimistic for white. Okay, let's see now. It's a lighting problem. Yes, we will fix this. That's what he says. Happens to Lugi too. Yeah. Oh boy, people are very concerned with the picture here. I can see why. I don't blame them. Every time I try and fix this, it looks great until right before the show, and I think it's because I have to change my angle, and suddenly things fall apart. Oh, the Philidor defense. Well, let's do that next, actually, even though I don't know if it was in that order that I had it. No, I have some other things first, but since someone's asking about that, let me ask another question I got. Maybe, who knows, it might be from the same person. Put up another game here. This is a great question because a lot of teachers teach this line. And on top of that, it's in quite a few repertoire, actually 3 or 4 repertoire books. So let's just take a look at this. This is from the Pirc Defense. And let me see if I can find the original question. What's the original question? Excuse me. Should be able to find this. I may have to just repeat it from memory. Interesting that I don't Don't seem to have it right in front of me, which is a little surprising. Okay, basically the question is, what about this order, this move order, which is, here's the Pirc defense. White plays here, black plays here. White protects the pawn and plays here rather than g6, which is the Pirc proper, I guess. That's sort of the main line. We've talked about that. And this move. And he asked me about this position. He says, what should white do here? What's a good way for white to play? And my answer to that is that basically I think black's okay, and that's why so many top players have played this position. So you're not going to get an advantage by force here. The most natural move is this, attacking here, and black has two moves that are good. The most popular one now is just that. For quite a while there, black was playing this, and I looked up again in major databases, and black is still doing fine in this position because his pawns cover key central squares here. I think king e8 is safer, and some of the top players like Amarpashvili, who started playing this line, sort of switched to king e8 after a while. So, I mean, you can play that way, but you're not theoretically going to get any advantage, and that's also very well known, obviously, for black, both those moves. So what we find out is this move is another thing that's played a lot. It's very popular, but I think just this is fine. The main move has been bishop e6, and that's also scored perfectly well. So let me say a few things about this. Before we even get to this, one issue with this opening is that you can play that move. That's a Philidor defense, and that's Philidor's defense there, which leaves black the choice of playing here, which is a traditional Philidor's. And I think white can play for an advantage here, with this move, standard old style move. I think top players still want to be white here, even though the Philidor's is also recommended in quite a few books, usually the same books, and is sort of it's in decent theoretical shape. But still, this is maybe a better way to play for advantage than the ending. The other thing black can play is this, which looks very passive, but actually has had some support by very good players. It scores reasonably well. I still think white has to be a little better here. This move might be slightly underrated. Bishop e2 is the main move, and I think bishop c4 gives white a very small advantage, but a definite one. Maybe I'm not comfortable in these positions as black, even though they might be just about equal theoretically. So that's one thing I just wanted to say, that if you want to beat this line, maybe you want to think about knight f3. But at any rate, after this, I started thinking about this position quite a bit and looking at some games. I think the most interesting way to play is simply to attack this right away, which hasn't been very popular, but has maybe gotten a little more popular the last few years. And now just bring that piece out. Don't worry. Basically, you're not worried about this move, which I think is what people have worried about before, because after all, after here, you seem to be just losing this pawn. But white can play a couple moves here, but the best of all is just this. Now check, of course, you're going to lose a piece. There's two pieces hanging. So this move is natural, but then after here, black's actually going to lose material. The knight's trapped, so g4 is coming, or g3 or something. And even knight a4, I suppose, is threatened. At any rate, this is not good for black, which means that knight g4 is not good, because if you're just going to get chased away, that's a bad sign. Okay, in fact, you're going to lose a pawn at that point. So I think this bishop e3 is an interesting move, and one way, let me see, what are some other things I show here? Okay, so here, stopping knight g5. Knight g5 is almost a threat. Knight g5 followed by bishop c4 is becoming very serious. But then white simply castles. White's getting ahead in development. And then I think this is a nice move. You just play here, and the idea is to play knight here and here with a good solid positional advantage. And you might say, what about this again? But the problem is that allows a tactic here with this idea. And if he takes, we go here, and that's a clear advantage, or at least a very nice advantage. And if he plays this move, then I think it turns out that this check is just quite good. Let me make sure about that. Still looks sort of interesting, doesn't it? But yeah, I guess it'd have to be this way. Yeah, I think I looked at this, but now I can't remember it. Here and here. So what's our materials? White just a pawn ahead? Oh yeah, and he's getting out. Oh, he'll get out easily here, yeah. Oh, and there's even this idea at some point. Much less something over here, bishop here. Okay, so I think that's pretty convincing. Might want to look at that, because I just don't remember exactly what's going on. But if he can't play knight g4, then we're about to just play knight d2. So h6 is a very natural move, but white's better. One reason I showed you this is because I think there's a lot of ways for white to end up better. Bishop e6, which he plays against almost every move. I think white just wins the bishop pair and with simplification, and is going to be very happy here. Which leaves the best move, king e7, but they do have to find that. And I think then black is probably okay, but at least it's still very interesting. White can castle, for example. White might want to just play here. He's stopping that knight g4 move. He's also thinking about playing g4 sometimes just to grab some space. And an example is just throw in this move knight check. And after takes, and here, I think g4 was what I was trying here. Oh, knight d2 first. Has ideas of that, but mainly has ideas of trying to control that square. And black gets developed. That's the best move, I think. And then just bishop here, and there's ideas of playing either bishop e4 or knight e4, and I prefer white, although it's really tiny. I mean, if black plays well, he's probably doing fine here, but it's a game. So I think this whole idea of playing knight f3 on the 6th move, if you're going to play this ending, I think this is nice because it doesn't allow for much simplification, and you get plenty of good play, and black can go wrong so easily. Very, very simple way to play. I love this idea of knight here eventually too. It takes a while to get in, but it's definitely worth doing. And also, right now after you play bishop e3, he's really got to watch out for just very simply knight g5 and bishop c4. It starts to become a serious issue. Okay, so what else do I have here? Let's see if I'm getting any more questions here. We're still talking about the lighting, it looks like. Okay, we'll try to do something about that. And what else do we have here? We have more theoretical questions, but I think there are also some general questions. Yeah, the U.S. Oh, here's one. We'll talk about the U.S. Championship. There was also a question, which copy of my system should I read? There are many copies out there, and I happen to be a big Nimzovich fan, and I have a huge library, and I've read all the my system translations. So the first thing, if you do happen to read, he does say which English copy. If you do happen to read German, that's the best in a way because it's the original, and you can't do better than the Kurt Rotman edition. That's 2005 edition of my system. It's got some extras in it too, which are fun. But the question is about the English versions, and the original Philip Hereford version from right after when the book was published, when my system was published, is actually quite a good translation, which would be hard to find, except that that's a Bell edition, except that it also appears in Lou Hayes. I don't know what happened with copyrights on this and all that, and permissions and all that, but he reproduced that in his book, which is called something like My System. It's 1991 book, modern version, 20th century version, or something like that. And that's the same translation. Then there's the Quality Chess edition, which if you ever read a review of mine in Week in Chess, I try to demonstrate that it's one of the worst translations I've ever seen of any chess book ever. And I looked at it again just for fun, and I'll stand by that. It just butchers the English language. It changes entire passages. It's not grammatical. It misses the point of what Nimzowitsch is saying. I don't know how it got by proofreaders, but I suspect they didn't proofread, at least not remotely carefully. So enough of that, but I would definitely avoid that. So the best translation by far is Robert Sherwood's, which has only so far been published in the E+ electronic edition. So if you get that app, you can buy that, and that means you can move the pieces without having to put them on a board, and it's a lot of fun. This is an electronic app for the iPad or the iPhone. But the physical version of that book actually is coupled with Chess Praxis, the entire Chess Praxis, Sherwood's translation of that. And it's coming up very soon. It was going to be with Siles Press, but now it's with New in Chess, and they're going to come up with that, I think, this summer. And it's a marvelous deal, and I think I would wait for that because you get both books and you get the best translation of my system. So that's an answer to that question. Okay, who do you think will win the U.S. Championship? Which starts in 2 days. And it was funny that the person who asked me that, I didn't even realize it started in 2 days. I haven't been reading about it, and I suddenly realized there'd been so much going on in the chess world that something that close to home hadn't struck me yet. I knew it was coming up, but it's just the day after tomorrow. So I guess my answer to that is pretty simple. It'd be pretty silly to pick anybody except either Nakamura or Caruana, maybe Wesley So. Those are the elite players. I tend to think Nakamura has a slightly better chance because he's so at home in this tournament and has won it a few times. Um, he's also a great tournament player, sort of again which includes certain lower players in it. And he tends to be very good at beating those players, lower by elite standards. But obviously, Fabiano Caruana is one of the top players of the world, right next to Nakamura, actually, and is probably a co-favorite. I think Wesley So's performance is going to be interesting because I wonder if there has to be a little psychological overhang from last year where he was forfeited in one game for writing notes, not even chess notes, on his sheet, and it was very controversial, and he had to be very upset by it. And you wonder if his relationship with the organizers, which didn't seem perfect at any rate, might sort of interfere with his concentration. I doubt it. I think he'll play fine, but it'd be interesting to see. These very weird circumstances. And Gadakovsky's always hanging around. He's the fourth-ranked player in the tournament, and always has a chance because he's won it 4 times or so, and is a world-class player. But Gada now is over 100 points below the top players in the tournament, and that's a bad sign, I think, that his chances probably aren't really high, but he's always in it. He's always a threat. And let me just tell you who the rest of the field contains. Roy Robson, Alex Onashuk, Sam Shankland, Jeffrey Zhang, who I don't know much about at all. He's only 15 years old, so that should be interesting. Has a terrifically high rating. We'll see. I think there's some skepticism about whether he's really that strong because he has a terrific USCF rating. And but we'll see. This is a big chance for him. It's fun to have younger players. Alex Lenderman, Akobian, some of the standard people who seem to be in every year. The return of Alexander Shabalov, who hasn't played in a little while. He's a 4-time winner of the U.S. Championship. And Ashkat Chandram, who was the U.S. Junior Champion, and he's only 16 years old. So it'd be really wonderful if some of these young guys can do well. And it's fun to see some young guys because we're starting to get, like a lot of countries, we're starting to get sort of the old guard every year. And it'd be nice to get some new, fresh names in there. So then on the women's side, it's the same old cast there. It's worse, actually, in terms of not getting new players, but at least that are strong at the top. We have Irina Krush. I guess she's sort of the presumptive favorite, having won it 7 times or something. And also being, I think, the highest ranked. Anna Zatonsky is very close. They're both rated about the same. And Anna Zatonsky is a 4-time champion, incredibly strong player. I always loved the way she played. I just love her style, and great player. She hadn't been playing as much recently, and I think that would have made her less of a co-favorite, but I noticed that she just played this last month, just a few weeks ago, in a tournament for the first time in quite a while, and has been playing in the Bundesliga. And that might be just enough practice to get her back in form, and it might also mean that she's been studying, in which case she should put up she and Krush should have a great fight together. So the other nearest contender is probably Tatev Abrahamyan, who's always there fighting away and is a very strong player and plays a lot. And then there's a whole bunch of other players. I did list them somewhere, but I don't have them in front of me. So you can look that up. Just go to the U.S. Chess site, uschess.org, or the U.S. Championship site, which is, I think, uschesschamps.com or something like that. But easy to find with Google. All right. So let me see if I have any chats. What about study over the board or on a computer screen? Well, I think it's great to study over the board if you've got time for it, because what I found was when I started playing again, I tend to look at chess boards all day long, sometimes for as much as 12 to 14 hours, and I think it really hurt my perspective, and it made it harder for me to look at the board. So at least if you're mainly someone who looks online and plays blitz and studies online, it's I think a very useful thing to do before you go to a tournament, to practice a little on the board. And you might have new ideas or better ideas, which I think is the question. It probably slows you down a little bit. On the other hand, studying on screen is almost essential for example, all the top players, because you cover so much material so much quicker. You don't have to reset up the position. You have access to these wonderful annotated games and databases and books that talk about the positions, which you would otherwise have to have next to you on the table if you're lucky. And so it's much more efficient to analyze and certainly to write books. Everyone is sitting in front of their computer when they write books these days. And but I strongly recommend trying to do at least part of your study or part of your practice over the board, setting up a board. I think it's very, very good, assuming you're a tournament player and want to get better. Whether you have better ideas, I'm not sure. I mean, I grew up 100% over the board, so I guess it's not very easy for me to answer that question. I think it's easy to become impatient, and if you put an engine on a course when you're on the computer, that's going to prejudice you, and that probably does hurt your perspective. It's very good, by the way, to study without an engine going on. You can turn it on some of the time, and if you want to cover a lot of material and you're studying, for your opponent that night, you might want to turn it on at critical positions in some opening or something where a lot of pieces are hanging. You might not want to have to work out all the details when you don't really have time, but it's very healthy if you can get the time to, put positions on the board and study. Maybe put a clock on them and just take a certain amount of time to write down your thoughts. And so it's a great question. Getting a complaint about Nakamura getting off with his infractions. But at least he didn't get completely off because he got forfeited, well, not forfeited, but he got a completely lost game because of his touch move in the candidates, so that worked out fairly. The castling with two hands is still being argued about. I think one thing about the castling with two hands, I know this goes on forever, and everybody watching probably knows more about it than I do, but it wasn't claimed. Nobody claimed it, so right away that's kind of an issue. And plus, I'm not sure if anybody even saw it, but so I think it would have been hard to punish him for that. Following the Komodo, oh yes, I've been asked this. Are you following the Komodo human engines matches? No, I'm not. I know people are, and I guess computers are getting scarier all the time. So that's a good question. But I'm afraid I'm the wrong person to answer it. There's also some other computer chess going on that's just really fascinating. The games tend to be incredibly boring, but the results and the way that they win games and draw them, of course. This is outrageous at the top between computers. The drawing rate has gotten totally out of hand, which of course is because chess is a draw ultimately with perfect play. And even if computers aren't perfect, it's hard for them to get enough edge. Well, there's my little screen going crazy again. I see what you guys are talking about. I can actually see myself out of the corner of my eye. This is not good. Okay, so do we have other questions earlier? Has anyone read Aaron Nimzowitsch, A Reappraisal by Raymond Keene? I'm sorry I missed that. Oh, and there's other questions. I just didn't scroll up. Yes, let's address some of those before I get to. There's one other I'd really like to get to, though. Yeah. Oh, let me see, what time is it? Well, we can do a few things. We started a little late. So yes, a tremendous book. It's funny, Raymond Keene gets a lot of flack for his books, which were often written by somebody else and are often extremely superficial and full of mistakes. And he's gotten a lot of flack for just cranking out too many books. But this book is one of the best books written. It's a classic. It's just fantastic. He put tons of time into it. He'd done an amazing amount of research. He writes it well. Keene is a very smart fellow, and he understands Nimzowitsch very well, and just a magnificent book. So I recommend it highly if you can get a copy. It's floating around the web somewhere, I'm sure, and you can get hard copies, hopefully not for too much money. But yeah, I strongly recommend that book. I've never heard of anybody who didn't like it, by the way. What are your thoughts on the French? I have another French question maybe I should be answering. Ouch. I'll save that for next week. Juan Arias, great question, but actually I probably have to even just look it up before I make a fool of myself. And also, I actually do have a little opinion about it, but also I think I owe other people questions. There's one question I really wanted to get to because it's been around for a long time now. Elaborating on Nimzowitsch, we'll do that next week. My fault for not looking at the chat. I love the chat. Thanks for keep talking. You can talk to each other also. So I'm really appreciative of when you throw things into the chat. I really enjoy that. Let me quickly get to this question. I might not be able to finish it, but I think it's an extremely good one. As someone it's been around for so many weeks. As someone who likes general ideas in the field of Queen's Indian defense, and not necessarily being inclined to work on a line specifically intended to combat the London system, I seem to find that adopting the QID for that purpose would appear to hold some promise. Could you offer your expert assessment for the possible viability of such an approach, and should it meet with your seal of approval, some pointers regarding its implementation? Well, I guess the first thing to point out is the London system, which is bishop f4 after d4, is a safe system, but it's kind of slow. So really any logical system against it is probably reasonably safe and sound enough. And the Queen's Indian setup has been quite popular among top players against the London, although other ones have too. So the specifics of the implementation, though, are very complicated, and I thought I'd show a couple of games, maybe one this week, maybe then the other one next week, just to talk about two possible approaches by Black. This is a complicated question because there are, I didn't count, but I imagine over 1,000 games in the major databases with this basic setup. But let me show you some things from Black's point of view, and maybe at some other point I can show you White's point of view, because we've talked quite a bit about the London already, and I lectured about the London on ICC. Now this is the Queen's Indian, is this b6 move, and you can get there various ways. First, here's the London. Excuse me, I should get the London move in, bishop f4. So you can play there right away, and that's what we'll look at. You can also play this move first and try to commit White to this move or this move. But the thing is, if he plays there, maybe there are going to be some problems with queen b6 at some point, although right away it's not that big a deal. So a lot of people will play here, and then you've committed them to not playing the move c4. The reason that's relevant is because sometimes after b6, you're going to see the move c4. So White's standard setup in the London is to play e3, and then bishop e2. That's sort of a standard move. Black develops, and White castles, Black develops. This is just one way to play, but I think it's pretty reasonable for Black. And now I want to show you c4. Most London players, the majority, are going to play c3 systems. But c4 is important and recommended by quite a few pretty strong London players. So we need to think about it, about what to do about this. And in this game, let's see what happens. Oh, what I think Black should take immediately. I think that's a good idea. First of all, there are options, but I like this. And then the idea, of course, is to get d5 in. And one reason now, he waits one move to do that, but there's nothing much, there's no other answer really. White plays here and Black plays here. And the nice thing about this is we're going to get one of these isolated pawn positions, but without White's bishop being particularly aggressively placed and this bishop being really on the wrong square. It should be either here, or maybe even on c1. So Black should be okay here just because he's gaining a little bit of time on a normal isolated pawn position. For example, this is a very natural move, maybe the most dangerous because bishop f3 can come. But Black simply takes. And if bishop f3, which looks attractive at first, then Black can simply develop with knight a6. It's not the only move at all. Black can also just play here. This is fine, with an eye on that square. And if he plays there, which is certainly natural, then just develop. And White has this isolated pawn without really having the right kind of active pieces. Isolated pawns are good enough because they have more space and they control more things in the center that I would not call this better for Black, but I think it's perfectly okay for Black. Because White has no real attack. And Black's managed to simplify a little bit. And Black can also play, as he did in one game, he can play this move. I'm sorry, on the move before he can play knight a6 here. That's also okay. Then the knight can come to squares like this, or up, or wherever. And it turns out this doesn't mean anything. Playing here doesn't do much. So that's fine, that position for Black. Okay, well if that's okay, then what else can be played? In this game that I'm sort of quoting, Black played a more normal move, and White played a more normal move, and Black captured. Black can also just not even worry about things and play here. No problem at all there. For example, takes and takes. And if knight takes, of course, you've got knight takes here, you've got queen takes, which is quite good. You don't have to block off your own bishop. And on this move, what did I suggest here? Just rook c8. Very simple. And you see White just doesn't have his usual isolated pawn attack on the king side. The bishop's not even very well placed. It probably should be on this diagonal. So I actually prefer to play black in these positions, although I would never claim an advantage. I think that's just unrealistic. So d takes c4 was played instead. And now this time white does get a very nice bishop. So everything's good for white except maybe that piece. He should have a rook here maybe too. And black has time to make some good moves. The easiest one is just here. Let me just show you that one. There's other moves. In the game he played this move, which was fine because it had ideas of going either way. But this is really simple because it puts direct pressure there. And white played here in one game, and then black played here. That was a nice move. Just neutralize this bishop. And it turns out that this is fully equal. Easy position to play. And that's just because white didn't get his attack going early enough. He didn't get things moving fast enough. Now white still doesn't stand badly, just because he does have a little space, and his pieces are better than they were in the other examples. So it's not as though black is any better than equal. Okay, and then let me just quickly show you something else then to answer the same question. Another more typical setup, although they're both fairly typical, is this one. And this is another game. So I'm answering this very superficially because both white and black have so many options for how to set up. But here's another way this Queen's Indian thing can go. Okay, so there's that c3 move. Instead of c4, he's playing c3. And that'll transpose into playing e3, bishop f4, followed by e3, followed by c3 later, which is something you'll see a lot of. Okay, there's the bishop f4. There's knight there because he's thinking about maybe trying to threaten e4. And that's to save, sometimes to save the bishop. And also maybe he's still holding forth, hoping to get e4 instead of just e3. But it all comes down to a very typical position. Castles, e3. Okay, so you'll see this kind of position a lot. This thing with the knights here, and the pawns here, and the bishop here, and even that move. And black's making all his normal Queen's Indian moves. And the question is basically, what do you think of this? Is it okay? And I think it is okay. I think black's fine in this kind of position. You're not really aiming to play what you play in the Queen's Indian with moves like that and that. You're more aiming just to get your pieces out. You're probably going to play c5, maybe knight c6. Let me show you what happens in this particular version. Attacking with c5 here. And now I like the next move a lot. If you play an early c5, I think you should do this too. I think you should take quickly before white has to decide how to take back. Almost every top player will take back that way because it opens up the rook after castling and maybe even allows for a kingside attack, rook up and rook over. And it's unbalanced, and most players are going to want an unbalanced position. But I think it's good to take first just for technical reasons so that he has to decide which way to take before you commit your pieces. So if he takes with the e-pawn, you can get this standard position. It looks a little passive for black. But first of all, you'll notice you haven't committed the knight here. And when you've got the pawns here, it turns out the knight's better placed there. So black has a little lack of space, but he does have 2-to-1 in the center, 2 pawns to 1, like a Sicilian. He has the open file, like a Sicilian. And it turns out he can also think about just expanding on the queen side, as in a Sicilian. Or playing with rook e8, maybe bishop f8, maybe thinking about e5, because he does have those center pawns. So the question is, how can white make progress here? And the way that this was Bronstein did in this game was play here. That's been played quite a bit, attacking d6, by the way. And black defends d6 and gets his queen on an open file. And white plays here, taking over the file, all natural. And now black played this move. White maintained maybe a slight advantage here. He played a4 pretty soon. Probably a better move. One thing you can always do is this. And then if a4, you might even sort of force your way in on to get some space on the queen side. But I think a really good move here is just this. I'm sorry, excuse me. Instead of after rook e1, is to play here. And that's a maneuver to remember. Now sometimes that's followed up by f5, but not here because there's pressure down here. So in this case, he has a different idea. White retreats here, and black brings the other knight in. And it turns out it's sort of hard to get rid of this. The knight's well placed there, but he doesn't really want to retreat to get out of the way. And in fact, you could have played, if you wanted to be really safe here, you could have played here and then just taken this. And that's a pretty simple way to play. And then protect this. That's really quite equal. Maybe you have ideas of coming around this way. And for example, if a4, you can even sacrifice a pawn. You don't have to, but you can sacrifice that pawn because you've got so much light square pressure here. For example, if takes, you can just go here with a fork. It's not much of a sacrifice. And then here, now you have two bishops. This rook is controlling the open file. I wouldn't be surprised if black's better here. It might be better here, or at any rate, at least equal. So that's just an illustration of what can go on here. Let me just see if instead of, that's one way black could play, but black can also just play that simple move there. And if white stops these b5 ideas, as I say, you can still play for this, but in this particular position, it's nice to go to, this is what I wanted to show you, this theme of going for that square. Sometimes it's even helped by a queen. But this knight f4 move is actually a little hard to stop sometimes. If white tries to stop it directly, black just goes here, and this move is just too weakening. It turns out to be a real problem for white. He can't get a real attack going, and it's just a problem later, as you can imagine. And so what happens is black's going to get some other move in on like g5 himself, and it's not as weakening for him because he can cover up his weaknesses by putting a piece there. So this position is actually kind of fun for black. Maybe something like this happens. And the king can move over, and the bishop's protecting the king's side if need be. Rook can come over. So I don't think black's better, but I think it's quite playable and kind of more fun than the usual London system turns out to be. All right, so that's an answer to that Queen's Indian question, which has been around for weeks and weeks, and I never bothered to answer it. But Queen's Indian against the London, I'd say yes, it's playable. It's also playable for white. I mainly showed you black's ideas, and pretty interesting for both sides. So I would definitely consider playing that, but I wouldn't be scared of it for white. If you take a look, there's plenty of options for white also. Okay, sorry about the screen, which seems to get worse every week. And we will work on that. And let me see if there's any more recent questions. A particular structure, white playing against the stone wall. We actually answered that a few weeks back. If you wander back there, but I will answer it again. I always save all these questions. I'll mention it again in the next few within the next few weeks. But if you go back, I think to last year, there's an anti-stonewall question. It may have even come up twice. So we'll talk about that then. It's a little bit, since we're out of time now, I don't really think I can address that right at the moment. But I will save this. I'll save all questions, including that French question. Prior to Karyakin's candidate success, you'd hardly hear the Queen's Indian. That's because all the top players played it, but it wasn't being allowed because there's so many d4, d5s and e4, e5s. Actually, almost all the top players play the Queen's Indian at one point or another. So few of them play the Bugwin. Here's the problem. If you don't play the Queen's Gambit, and if you're playing this system, people are so reluctant to allow the Nimzo Indian, although you used to see a lot more of those. And by the time of the candidates, all you were seeing is white avoiding the Nimzo Indian. Well, how do you do that? You mainly play this move. And then a lot of times black will play the Queen's Gambit decline, but then here's that Catalan, and a lot of players of black don't want to play against that Catalan, or they don't want to play the main lines of the Queen's Gambit. So the main option for many, many years has been this, and that was featured in all kinds of world championships and things like that. So it's not so much that this has disappeared from people's repertoires, it's just that they weren't facing it because so many games were going, were either Grunfeld defenses, this kind of thing, Grunfelds, King's Indians, and that kind of thing, or d4, d5, Queen's Gambits, and Slavs, in which case that decision doesn't come up to play the Queen's Indian. And also, this became such a monstrously, just played so many of these top games that, of course, you aren't going to get a Queen's Indian out of that. So it's sitting there in all the top players' repertoire. It's not as though it's really disappeared. It's just that the particular move orders that are fashionable right now, it's not happening very much. And but it's still, if you go back over the last few years, I think you'll find an awful lot of them there. I think one problem is white doesn't think he can get anything against the Queen's Indian, so been trying to do other orders and other things. Okay, very good questions as usual by all of you. And we'll catch you next week, and we'll see about that green halo that's going on there. Maybe if I think less, the halo won't appear. But it's some kind of lighting issue that keeps giving us problems. So thanks everybody, and I will see you next week.